Hey, everybody, welcome back to Miles and Mentors. We have a great one lined up for you today with Anthony Villanueva. Joining us today, we're going to tap all into his lived and learned experience throughout the industry and pass some of that information on to you. So stick with us. We have a great one lined up for you right after this on Miles and Mentors.
Welcome to Miles and Mentors, the podcast that humanizes trucking, getting real life advice and insights from logistics professionals from all over the industry. We sit down with those seasoned mentors who have put in the miles with a mission to pass on the knowledge gained from years in the industry to you. Now buckle up and enjoy the show.
Hey, Anthony, what's going on, man?
Hey, Alex, how are you?
Doing pretty good. I'm stoked to have you on the show. I know we'd actually scheduled one of these a while back and life gets crazy. So we're happy to finally get you on here, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, for those that might not know who you are, if we start out with some introductions, just who are you and what's your role in the industry these days?
Yeah, so Anthony Villanueva. I spent the last 18 years deep in the trenches of freight and logistics, from cold calls and cutthroat markets to building, lasting relationships with shippers, carriers, and brokers along the way. I've seen just about everything in this industry, and I've got the stories and the scars to prove it. So, my background spans multimodal. Over the years, I've led capacity teams, sales teams, built books of businesses from the ground up, and weathered the ups and downs of one of the most unique and unpredictable industries that's out there. And so, yeah, and really beyond freight, I'm a proud father, youth basketball coach, and a Kansas City native. So I've been here my entire life. I love the Midwest. I love the heartland, and that's me in a nutshell.
I still find this amazing. The more people we have on the show, just how many end up being from the Kansas City area. I obviously we're a great hub, but a lot more logistics community in Kansas City than I would have ever thought.
Yeah, it's really grown over the last 20 years. I feel, I got in the industry back in '07, and in '07, I can maybe name a handful of companies, and they were usually like the larger common carrier. But, over those years, we've had a ton of, brokerages, asset-based carriers and such pop
Right.
up. And, it's funny, our industry is so connected. You can go to a conference, you can go to a restaurant, and you're going to know somebody that's in the industry. You're going to see them, and it really is a big city, but it's such a small market as well. That
Definitely.
one thing that my kids always say is like, Dad, you go somewhere and you know everybody, and it's really from this industry is where my relationships and contacts have been built.
Yeah, I mean that kind of says something for you though, man. I mean, no matter what industry you're in, if you're able to go somewhere and always know somebody, you're doing something right, my friend. So well done there.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
So obviously you've been in the industry for a while. Take it all the way back though. Why logistics? Why trucking? What brought you to this industry in the first place?
Man, that's a really good question. Ironically, I started my career in the mortgage industry.
Okay.
And so I
Pretty
did
similar,
more. Yeah, it's very, very similar. Uh, and what happened in 2006, you started to kind of see the bubble starting to burst on kind of the
Mm,
housing market, right? And
yeah.
there's a great movie, The Big Short, that kind of explains what happened during that time. But I was looking for an exit strategy. You could see, the market was getting tougher. The loan parameters are really starting to tighten. And it was like, what is my next move? And I had a friend who told me about a logistics company here in town. They said, hey, they're hiring for sales folks. Uh, Check it out, see what you think. I don't know if you'll like it or if it'll be a fit. So I went and applied, and that is really kind of my foray into the logistics world. I didn't know what LTL, what truckload, what any of that meant. I
Right.
got some really fantastic training. Have had some really good leaders and mentors around me, and I have been in the industry for the last 18 years since.
I love that, man. I want to dive into the leaders and mentors aspect, but before we do, I was making the joke about the two industries, being so
Mhm.
similar. But when you really think about it, you're coming from an industry before and an industry now that both deal with that market kind of shifting all the time and having to navigate that. Is there anything from your days in that real estate world that has aided you with that kind of point of view coming into this industry?
Yeah, I think, being able to read market data and see the cycles
Mm,
and being able to identify when you're starting to see either a downtrend or an uptrend, and then really the negotiation aspect of both industry. In one you have, interest rates, and at the time it was highly competitive. People were coming down off of 12, 13% mortgage interest rates, and they were getting into 5, 6%, right? So it was extremely competitive. You had to know all of the different programs that you could offer. I kind of feel freight and logistics the same way. You have to be well versed in all the different modes, all the different solutions that you're able to provide. But then you also have to negotiate in a competitive market, and whether you're negotiating with your customer to find the right landing spot of what you think is the right solution, or you're
yeah,
negotiating with carriers to get them to take the load that you're trying to move. That has really kind of been where the crossover has been between those
definitely.
industries.
That's fantastic, man. Now, you kind of mentioned there the mentors and leaders along the way that have helped you in that transition from one industry to another. I mean, obviously, we're seeing a lot of similarities in the business side of the aspect, but that's still a whole industry to jump and a ton to learn. Kind of who was in your path that you considered a mentor at that time that really helped you get your firm foundation?
So I was lucky enough to get put on a team of sales folks that were more seasoned, that had been there for a few years, and they had kind of built up a strong book. Um, and I was positioned between uh, two guys in general that I can think of that would always take the time. They'd answer my questions. They'd hear me on the phone. They'd give me advice. It wasn't necessarily their role. Uh, they didn't have to do that, but they were hearing me struggle,
Yeah,
and they're like, hey, why don't you try asking this, try talking about this. They were seeing me, really put in the effort and trying to be successful and trying to learn it, and I think just out of pity, maybe they were like, "Hey, take a look at some of this information that we have. Listen to us on the calls. Look at some of the things that we're doing, and see kind of how you can, bring that into your pitch or how you're approaching customers." And a lot of my success over the years is there's always been influential people that in each step of my journey of my career that I've been able to link up with, whether it was somebody who wanted to work directly with me,
yeah.
or it was just by pure coincidence that I owe a lot of my success over my time to their influence and their guidance, and really they're just friendship with going through everything.
Fantastic. Man, so we're talking a little bit here about, building books and being in that sales side of the industry and all. Throughout your time in the industry, what would you say? I mean, you've dealt with some high performance teams and stuff. What are some strategies that you've seen that, consistently work in the logistics space?
Yeah, I think a lot of the strategies are not being so broad with your approach, right? Don't be a generalist.
Yeah.
Find a couple industries that you're really passionate about and you have a lot of knowledge on. Because one, it makes the confidence level of you having those conversations with those cold prospects so much easier. And you come off with real world experience, and so if you can speak the language, you can talk about some of the challenges they may face, things like that. It makes you immediately build that credibility. And a lot of what we need, especially when you're working with somebody, across the country or in a different, country, you need that credibility, and they need to understand that the pain that they're maybe facing. And so that's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is just be persistent.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people might put in the effort and they might give up just one or two calls before something happens. And I see it a lot. I've seen it a lot. You're making those cold calls, you're sending cold emails, you're not getting a ton of response. Uh, but a lot of times you give up too soon. And having that resilience and having the consistency to stay the path, make sure that you're doing all those things before you give up too quickly.
Right. In your time in the industry here, have you dealt with like one aspect of trucking companies more than others, like, guys just starting out or larger fleets or
So, I mean, we've worked with owner operators that, have had their authority for a year and they're really trying to build, some consistent shippers, and they're taking spot market freight or transactional freight
yeah,
really just to kind of get the name out there. But we've also worked with the larger, Warner, Schneiders, JB Hunts of the world that have, a large fleet of assets, and they do different modes, and they're able to spot and drop and hook and do those things. And I would say in the market, the small to mid-sized carrier is really the 5 to 100 trucks is
yeah,
really the majority of the market of the companies that you work with.
sure,
There's, you know, 4 or 5 carriers that have a thousand plus trucks and trailers, and they're really focused more on the direct contract and shipper side of things, and not really in the brokerage space as much as some of the small to mid-sized carriers.
definitely. With this show, we're kind of catering to a wide audience, but
Mhm.
that main demographic we're looking at is somebody that's been a company driver wanting to branch out to their own thing and eventually grow it into a fleet and tap into that lived and learned knowledge of industry pros to be able to do that in the most strategic way manner or way possible, I guess I should say. There over your time, seeing and dealing with different companies, is there something that stands out that, you see as a downfall that, small companies do early on, that may hinder their, excelling or being successful?
Yeah, I think sometimes people try to grow too fast.
Mm,
There's no such thing as an overnight success. It's a lot of try and failing and adjusting. And I would say, if you're a owner operator just starting out and you're getting on with brokers, be communicative,
yeah,
right? Let them know what's happening, even if it's bad news. Let them know so they can be aware of it, and let their customer know, let the shipper consignee, et cetera. I said a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but I've had experiences and stories where we've given freight to newer carriers, and rather than being upfront and open with what they're dealing with and what's happening, they just go silent. And that is a hard place to be, especially when you're new and you're trying to build a relationship with somebody that has a lot of freight, or you're trying to get your name out there. It's
yeah,
just not something you want to get flagged for knowing. So I would say even good, bad, indifferent, communicate.
100%. Now, going from that spot of someone that's branched out from, being a company driver to that owner operator spot, we were talking about taking those different load board loads and all that. As they're trying to grow, become a fleet, take on a few more trucks, hit that 5 to whatever many trucks out there. Do you have insight on kind of the best path or things to watch out for as you're doing that to grow most strategically?
I would say, as if you're really trying to grow, set benchmarks, right? If you're at one truck and you want to
Love
get to 5, what is the path to 5, and what are those goals, and how do you have to get there? Map it out. And a lot of times that'll give you good insight into where you need to start. And the plan that you come up with may not be the plan you finish with, but at least there's a roadmap that you can, iterate, make adjustments, learn what you don't know, and get to that goal. And I would say I would take that same step from, if you want to go from 5 to 25, right?
Right.
Is the lessons that you learn getting from 1 to 5. And I'd say probably 1 to 5 is maybe the hardest spot you'll get to in growth, is because it is, you think, oh, adding 4 more trucks isn't that difficult, but you look at, the cost to lease, the trailer, fuel, insurance, all the added expenses. If you can figure out and map out how you get from 1 to 5, you can probably use that same plan to map out how you get from 5 to 25.
Right. No, that's solid advice there too. I mean, and it's one of those industries, right? Like that's an expense no matter even in your personal life, right? But in trucking, those expenses that you just listed off are all substantial. I mean,
Mhm.
it's one of those industries, everything costs a lot of money, so you've got to be strategic around it. But I love the way you frame that. I mean, you hear all the time if you watch interviews of like multimillionaires and stuff, they're like, that first million is the toughest million you ever make. After that, it's easy. It's like you figure out that recipe and you learn how to rinse and repeat. It's a whole lot easier. But just learning that framework is really
Mhm.
where it's at.
Yeah, the framework of it, and to your point, it's where you are going to really understand the steps that are necessary, right? And some of them you're going to have missteps, and that's okay. We all have had them, have learned from them. Hopefully, we've learned from them. But you don't know until you start to try and kind of figure that out. And again, to your point, I'm not a millionaire by any means. If you figure out the path to that, you let me know, and we'll talk about that offline. Uh, but as you're really trying to grow, you have to make sure that it is scalable, and sometimes having a repeatable process that is tried and true is really the best path forward.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we talked early on about your kids kind of giving you a hard time about knowing everybody everywhere you go. I think that plays in a big role in any industry, but this industry, targeted here, right? That networking aspect, you get mentorship that from or through that from the different people you learn from. How has that impacted your journey, and how important do you think that is to someone inspiring to be a company owner, grow into a fleet owner?
Yeah, no, I think it's probably the most important thing you can do.
Yeah.
I read a line one time that said your relationships are your currency, and when you're networking with folks and you're learning about who they are and what they do, and you're not going to connect with everybody, but I think you can learn something from everybody. And putting yourself out there, like I will always, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I'll shoot a connection request to somebody that I've read their background, I see what they're doing, and it's just a simple, hey, I'm trying to connect with a like-minded individual. I saw your background. Would love to get a couple questions answered if you have time.
Yeah.
Right? It's really just to learn. Everybody has different experiences, and everybody's gone or taken different paths. And so, the bigger your network that you can call on, if you can have conversation with somebody, and you never know when they're going to need something or you're going to need something.
Yeah.
And
Goes both ways.
so, yeah, it's a two-way street. And I've been lucky enough to really make some strong connections with folks. People that I've worked with in the past, companies that I've been at, leadership teams that I've helped implement. And it's one of those things where the advice and the networking, it's just, to me, it's invaluable. I think you have to have it, and if you aren't doing it, try it. It's awkward. It might make you feel, you might fear rejection or whatever, but just put yourself out there. I think more people are responsive and willing to help than not.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things too that I can say I haven't really had a bad experience from it. I mean, at the very minimum, I think you'll probably meet some nice people, have some decent conversations from it. But I think there's a huge unseen value from it as well, because not only are you growing this network, these people that are involved in all different aspects of the industry, and as you're trying to grow a company, you need a lot of that stuff. So knowing someone in these different spaces helps, but I think where the huge part is who they know. It's like
Mhm.
you may not directly be connected with them, but you never know when 6 months down the line, they're gonna be talking about business in the background. Like, actually, I know this guy named Anthony and he does this, and yeah, let me get you guys in contact. You know, you you're not visually seeing that connection, but because you networked and hooked up and linked with the people that you did, you're able to grow your business or find resources to help your business in various different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you could have other people passing your name around when you're not there, that's never a bad thing.
Right.
It's always, for me, it's been helpful. I've gotten a lot of opportunity that's come my way from that. is I can think of somebody who, you know, knows how to do this, that, or that, or has these attributes, or vice versa. If you know I'm hiring somebody, or I'm looking to bring somebody on, or et cetera, I can reach out to that person and say, hey, I see you're connected with so and so. What can you tell me about them? And
Yeah.
again, it works both ways. It's always a two-way street, but it's never, in my experience, been a bad thing to have more relationships than that.
100%. No, that's a great perspective to take it from there. Man, let's talk technology a little bit. So, this industry is one of those ones that often gets looked at as kind of stuck in the past, but we've noticed over, I mean, God, even just in the last decade, we've seen a boom of technology hit logistics in general. Kind of what is your feel on technology hitting this space, and where do you see it going?
That's a really good question again. Technology, I think, is going to continue to improve and make things more efficient. It is a industry that is stuck in the 70s or 80s in certain aspects, but I would say, with the adoption of AI, almost every TMS or WMS, et cetera, has some sort of version of of AI that's come out in the last year, and
Yeah.
that's been kind of the biggest selling point with a lot of them. But you have to have technology to help do some of the remedial tasks, right?
Yeah.
It's something that you can't have somebody bogged down doing those manual tasks that you can automate. Uh, I used to have a mentor in it, and in his office he had a sign, really artsy sign that said "Evolve or die,"
Mm,
and that's something that has always stuck with me. And I think that's kind of where our industry is in right now. I don't think we're on the latter half of that, but we're definitely in the evolution phase, and you're starting to see more helpful technology, whether it be you know EBOLs, API, EDI has been around for a long time from a connectivity perspective, but you're starting to see more investment on that end, trying to modernize, the current trucking space. And I definitely think it's needed, and I think we'll continue to see iterations of things that happen over the coming decades. And frankly, I'm excited to see it. Technology is something that I'm a huge fan of. I love having, whether it's a CRM, or having an app on my phone to where I can look at leads, or I can put in information, or
right.
I can make phone calls, or I can have my work phone line in an app that rings my cell phone. I mean, there's so many advancements that have been made in the last 10, 15 years. And, I think they will just continue to get better and more efficient. And, I'm all for it.
No doubt. Yeah. So outside of all this, I'm a huge history nerd, and those are different parts of my brain that sometimes I'll sit there and think, because a lot of times I'm like, man, I wish I could have existed in this era or whatever. But at the same time, I'm a technology nerd at the same point. So thinking about that, right? Like having your business phone and everything worked into your system of a CRM and all that. Thinking back to, I mean, even the not so distant past, everything being in a Rolodex or something like that. It's like,
Mhm.
that's a scary thought. So,
Yeah, I was actually laughing the other day because somebody had asked if we had a fax machine, or if we could fax something. I was like, God, I haven't sent a fax in, I mean, literally probably 10 years. Even
right.
like even an e-fax. It's just something that you don't hear of. But when I first started in the industry in '07, we were still faxing information to businesses, or we were putting folders together with all of our suite of services and sending them snail mail. Somebody
Right.
would say, hey, can you mail me information? Now fast forward is they can have that information as quickly as they want it.
Oh, 100%, man. So I got started in logistics, what was it, 2015, something like that. And the company I was with at the time had not really made their modernization efforts just yet. So everything was printed. Like everything you did online was printed, scanned in, you needed it, you printed it again. I'm like, we go through so much paper. It's unreal. and then seeing that company go from that to, a system like Salesforce, and everything's
Mhm.
automated, everything's digital. It's a game changer, and it's hard to think about, trying to go backward in that sense. But at the same time, it's exciting and scary to think just how fast that leap has been made, and it's already hard to think, how did we do it before, just 15 years ago? um what's that going to mean just 10 years in the future? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, yeah, it's funny you say that. I was reading something about generative AI, and the
Mm.
first AI was built. I want to say, and don't quote me, but like the '60s. The first AI was built in the '60s, and it was used in like manufacturing, or maybe the government or something. I can't remember fully, but it's been something that we've really seen a huge leap in when like a Chat GPT, or
Right.
something first came out, to just the different models and versions that are out now. But it's been something that's been in the work for 30 plus years, right? And they just found a way to make it more efficient, make it more relevant to today's so there, I think there's a lot of things that probably we'll go back to, that maybe were started and maybe shelved, or that we're going to see, that we're going to read about, that hey, we've been testing and playing with this for umpteenth years, and now it's in this version.
Right.
um, which again, to me, if there's any tool out there as you move into 2025, where everything's web based, everything's app based. My kids have built websites at school,
Right.
and they're young. um, so it's just like it's so accessible. It's very easy should you want to learn it. But I definitely think there's going to be just more and more leaps of things that have come out over the next 5 to 10 years, or maybe even sooner. So
No, that's a huge point, man. And it always makes me think, when we get in these conversations, makes me think back to like the Apollo missions. It, just getting to the moon is something that was on everyone's mind for the longest time. Being able to fly was on everyone's mind for the longest time. But it's like, when we got to the point that pretty much the entire world had their best minds working on that, working towards something at the same time, then, oh my God, we're able to make it to space. We're able to make it to the moon, which is, not even the easiest feat today, but we had everyone working on that at that time. And I see that same similarity with aspects like AI and other technologies. We've got so many amazing minds all around the world just so focused on it. And we especially see that in the AI space right now. Just from the point when it kind of hit public, around COVID time, and went
mhm.
from something like, that's cool, to now being like, holy crap, that's scary. It's able
Yeah.
to imitate likenesses. And I mean, just the leaps they've made within just a few years, because we have so many people trying to leapfrog one another in that technology space. It's impressive. And it kind of makes me think, like, what does that mean for, drivers, for business owners, for fleets, and like, what technology might be hitting the market that will just be a game changer for these companies? From your experience in the industry, is there, if you could make up anything technology that you think would be a huge game changer to the industry, anything come to mind that would just make life
Oh,
easier?
I mean, if there is a way for, I know, and I'm sure this probably exists, but from my angle, when you're tracking down paperwork and information, or even if you get a driver to accept tracking, for them to keep that tracking on,
Mm.
just something to where there's more visibility into where freight is, where drivers are, if there's changes in drivers or trailers, or whatever, something that links it all together and ties it back into an automated system, right? So you've got some systems that can talk to one another through an open API, and they
Yeah.
have integration and connection. But I still feel like the industry as a whole with technology is very fragmented. And you've seen some really, really great technology come out. I think about trucker tools getting with DAT, and Thai TMS, and just some of the things that are out there. But there's still, even if you have an API integration, for like telematics, you're still reliant on humans to accept the information and not turn the information off.
Yeah.
And so even with ELDs and having your trailers ELD to where you can connect into that, there are times where you're still missing the visibility to that.
Right.
So if there was a way or software, if somebody's listening to this and they want to go out and think, God, that's a great idea, you can run with it. I'm not smart enough to build it. But at the same time, I think if we were able to create something that is that connected, I mean, that's one of the things I hear the most about from shippers that I have worked with or that I work with is the visibility. We can send tracking, we can send them updates, but there are times where the driver we're tracking changes trailers, and now we're tracking a driver on a completely different load, and we're like, why is it going to California when it was supposed to go to New York?
Right. Right.
And so there's some missing pieces that happen in that whole ecosystem of tracking that I think if somebody can build and create that, it would be a game changer, as you said, and a lot of folks would be interested in it.
100%. The one thing I think too is, especially in the owner operator space, right? Like we have a large demographic that are still kind of anti-technology,
Mhm.
which hinders the progress to some degree. And I think as we get to a point where we start seeing more open to adapting and utilizing technology, it'll make it obviously that much easier for companies to invest and improve and grow. Because there's some stuff just like AI coming back in the 60s, you said, right? Like it needed somebody to accept it and put money into it and grow it before it could get to the point that it is today. Um, and it makes me think, just aspects like fraud and everything else in the industry, the more we're able to kind of modernize a lot of this stuff. I guess it's a bit of a double-edged sword when you talk about technology and fraud, because there's a lot of fraud in technology. But I think, there's a lot of tools out there that can definitely help us curve that at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think technology used in the right way is always going to be what's needed for the next steps. And
Yeah.
there's been tons of conversation, and I'm sure you've had folks on where you've talked about freight fraud and just the bad actors that are posing as carriers and taking loads. And I'd say over the last 2 years we've seen that, and they're becoming more advanced through
Yeah.
technology. And you know on the opposite flip side, you kind of have to have certain checks and balances in place to make sure yourself's protected. And I
Sure.
think there's other technologies out there that can help you identify those bad and at least minimize the times where you're having freight stolen, or you're having somebody act as a different carrier that has nefarious intentions, but
Yeah.
you're also using technology to kind of help combat that as well.
100%, man. We're getting towards the end here, but I want to take a moment to kind of tap into, again, go back to kind of your real estate days. I guess we're talking about, reading that market, the fluctuation, et cetera. Where do you see the market today, and kind of what's your foresight in the years to come, say the next 5 to 10 years?
God, it's a really tough one for me to get behind, right? Because I feel like last year I thought this year was going to be the year that we started to see things turn around, and we're going to kind of slowly
Yeah.
claw our way out of a freight recession that we've been in. But I think at some point, obviously the easy answer is at some point it's got to turn around, right? It's got to get better from where we are. But I think there's things this year that had happened that were unforeseen, and a lot of people and analysts are calling for 2026 is going to be the year. When I look at historical data dating back from 2002 really up to COVID, you really see about a 3 to 5 year cycle where there is a peak and a valley that happens. And, I think about the freight recession that we saw in 2010, 2011, 2012, and then the rebound that we saw, in 16, 17, and 18. And then again, we were starting to see what looked like another downturn in the market in 2019, and then COVID happened, and that really just kind of messed everybody's data up, right? And that became the norm. So, I think next year, maybe mid-year next year, we'll start to see some changes. But again, there's so much unpredictable things that
Yeah.
you can't really account for that, we didn't foresee, thinking with the tariffs and all the stuff, the conversation that's happening now. And so it's really hard to give you a good answer other than just opinion. And I've even seen some of the best, some of the best analysts that I follow. They're like, "Oh, okay, I have no idea what to say anymore," because I predicted this, this happened. I predicted this, that happened. It's kind of like
It's just the
everyone.
weather.
It's all opinion piece right now, and until we can get to some sort of stable state.
Sure.
So
Well, how about this? What is keeping you in logistics? What's exciting you about the industry that's keeping you around?
honestly, I love this industry. I love that every day is not the same. I
Mm,
love the relationships I built with shippers that rely on me to handle their goods and make sure things are getting picked up and delivered. And a lot of the relationships that I've built is really understanding their entire supply chain, front to back, understanding why certain MABDs need to be met, what happens when that doesn't happen. um, that is something that keeps me in this industry, is because I love the challenges. I love solving problems, and there's a lot of problems in freight and transportation. And so that's something that I've always enjoyed.
I love that, man. I really enjoyed this chat today. You're one of those guys that definitely has a lot there to pick from. So I'd love to get you back on for another part of this, if you wouldn't mind in the future, man.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the first podcast I've done. I've loved the conversation. Would love to come back.
Fantastic. And we ran into so many guys on this podcast now that's been around the KC area, which is kind of unintentional, maybe just kind of, my connections on LinkedIn and stuff being local, but there's so many. I think at some point here, we're going to have to do like a Miles and Mentors meetup around KC at some point. I have to rope you into that, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me know. I'll be there.
Fantastic. Well, before we let you to go today, I want to give you some chance for some shameless plugs and whatnot. How can people get a hold of you, find out more, tap into you for some more mentorship knowledge?
Yeah, so I'm really active on LinkedIn. So it's just Anthony Villanueva on LinkedIn. That is probably the best way to get in contact with me. Uh, I connect with folks on there constantly. Um, but yeah, that's really the best way to reach me.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to get that in the links below. Anything you feel like we've missed today that we need to throw in?
No, I think we had a really good conversation. We've touched
Yeah.
on a lot of stuff, and yeah, whatever we forgot today, we'll catch in the next episode.
Love it, man. Sounds great. Well, again, Anthony, I want to thank you so much for letting us take your time away for a little bit today to tap into your brain, that lived and learned knowledge. Been amazing chatting with you, and can't wait for part two, man.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks,
All right.
Alex.
For everyone out there watching, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, stay safe out there. Have a great day.